Good evening and welcome to NCJW Arizona's program, Fighting Back, Taking Arizona Lawmakers to Court. I don't know how many of you are members or supporters or new to our programs and to our organization, but I would, by way of an introduction, say that we are a progressive grassroots organization that advocates for social justice within a reproductive justice framework. And for those who may not know the full meaning of reproductive justice, it is the terminology, the vernacular that has been in use since the 90s to really explain what reproductive health care access is all about in its entirety. It is the right to determine whether or not to parent, and then the right to parent and raise your children in a safe, viable, sustainable environment. So basically, every subject falls within our framework, whether it's environmental justice, it's education, it's criminal justice, it's housing, it's food insufficiency and shortages, it's period poverty, it is everything that has to do with the quality of life of women, children, and families. So tonight, we're going to look at a way to change what has been happening across the country and the preponderance of state legislatures that have decided to erode our rights, that have decided to certainly cut back on access to reproductive health care, to curtail voting rights, and to cut back on education. This is a particularly timely program. Tomorrow we go to court here in Arizona, federal court in Phoenix, because NCJW-AZ is a co-plaintiff suing the state of Arizona to stop SB 1457, the newest abortion ban, from going into effect September 29th. And as co-plaintiffs in that case, we are represented by the Center for Reproductive Rights and the ACLU. So we're going to talk a bit about our case, and we are fortunate to have one of our attorneys from the Center for Reproductive Rights, Gail Dede, here with us this evening, on East Coast time, I might note, but she says she's a night owl. But we are also looking at all the intersectionality of the issues and the lawsuits that are attempting to curtail some of the most draconian laws that this state legislature managed to push through undercover, one might say, laws that they snuck into budget reconciliation bills, laws that did not have hearings, or bills rather, that did not have public hearings, that the public was not aware were coming forth. Bills, for example, like the ban on masking in public schools and the ban to require vaccinations, higher level students, high school and college, or vaccine passports by businesses, restaurateurs, etc. Certainly, the bills they have put forth to suppress voting, we are well aware of in this state that is notorious around the world for fraud and cyber ninjas, and are still making a charade out of the foundations of democracy. So what do we do to fight back? That's what we're going to explore this evening. How do we stand up? We have learned, those of us who are old enough, who took to the streets, you know, myself one of them, in the 60s, in the 70s, we've signed petitions, we've called our senators, we've called our representatives, we've called our state legislators, we've protested, we've marched, we've held up placards. And unfortunately, they still continue with their own agenda. So now we are taking them to court and holding them accountable for what they have done. So to share the moderating with me, I'd like to call on Julie Gunnagle, an attorney, an advocacy attorney that I'm sure everybody is aware of. I always like to say this, who narrowly became, narrowly was defeated in her effort to become Maricopa County attorney, and who we are very fortunate to have on our board is NCJW, and who has been one of my guiding hands as we worked with Gail and the Center for Reproductive Rights on this lawsuit. So Julie.
Oh my goodness, and maybe I need to add at this point in time, Julie Gunnagle lost, but also accepted the results of the election because that's what happened. It is my honor and privilege to be with y'all tonight in this amazing panel. So I'm not going to take up very much time except tell everybody to be watching our social tomorrow so that you can keep abreast of what's happening and hearing. We're going to be live tweeting it, so you'll be completely informed every step of the way. But you probably would rather hear the details of why this is so important and how it started from our amazing attorney, Gail Dede, who's over at the Center for Reproductive Rights. Gail joined the center in 2018 and is responsible for litigating some of the most important reproductive rights cases in the United States. She was counsel on the Title IX transgender student rights case that made history and has a long list of victories that I will not bore you with. Instead, I will hand it on over to her to, would you please briefly introduce yourself, and if you could give our audience this evening just a little idea, a taste of what 1457 does, why we're fighting, and what happens next.
Sure. Thanks so much, Julie, and thank you all for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk to you about this and tell you a bit about the work that we've been doing with our amazing plaintiff, National Council for Jewish Women, Arizona. So to get started, I'll give an overview of the law of SB 1457, and I'll also give an overview of what we've how we're challenging it, what we've brought in the lawsuit. So SB 1457 was passed during this past legislative session in 2021. It's what we refer to as an omnibus bill, which means it had lots of different restrictions, primarily on abortion care in Arizona, but also had wider restrictions on reproductive freedom and people's reproductive lives. We ultimately decided to challenge two of the provisions in 1457 in a lawsuit. The lawsuit was brought this August by the Center for Reproductive Rights, the ACLU Reproductive Freedom Project, and the ACLU of Arizona on behalf of two abortion providers, NCJW Arizona, the Arizona Medical Association, and Arizona Now. So the two provisions of this bill that we've challenged, I'll describe briefly. So the first provision, and certainly the one that is most striking, is we've been referring to it as the reason ban. It is a pre-viability abortion ban. And generally it makes it a felony for a physician to provide an abortion if they know that the pregnancy is being terminated due to an actual or suspected fetal condition, such as a genetic condition or diagnosis. It targets pregnant people who face deeply complex and personal decisions following a fetal diagnosis, and it intrudes upon their private decision-making. It wrenches away their right to choose pre-viability abortion. But it does much more. It also requires physicians, nurses, counselors, other types of medical or mental health professionals to report to the state any known violations of this reason ban, meaning if they find out that an abortion provider provided an abortion to someone who had decided to have the abortion after a fetal diagnosis, then they're obligated to report that to appropriate law enforcement authorities. And if they fail to do so, those medical professionals could be fined up to $10,000. And then additionally, medical professionals and service organizations such as abortion funds potentially organizations like NCJW Arizona might help and assist people in obtaining abortion care or referring people to abortion care, providing information about abortion as an option to someone who has a fetal diagnosis or a suspected fetal diagnosis, kind of presenting that as an option in that situation. Could be charged with criminal accomplice liability. So an accomplice to a crime for aiding patients in obtaining abortion care after a fetal diagnosis. And if that sounds familiar, if you've been following what's going on in Texas, there's a similar provision to the current abortion ban in Texas, where it's not just targeting physicians who provide abortion care, it's also targeting people, other medical professionals, people who help others assist them in obtaining abortion care are also being targeted by these laws. So generally, looking at the reason ban, we brought we brought this lawsuit on behalf of a wide range of plaintiffs. So they're representing a very wide range of patients, of pregnant people in Arizona. The Arizona Medical Association has nearly 4,000 members. And those include obstetricians who are treating pregnant people, includes genetic counselors, maternal fetal medicine specialists, geneticists, people who are not just providing medical treatment to the pregnant people themselves, people who have capacity for pregnancy, but also are diagnosing these types of fetal conditions that may end up being prohibited by this law. So looking at that scope, I'm going to describe a couple of the claims that we made just in layman's terms. So the first claim should be fairly obvious in that there's a constitutional right in this country under the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution that says that a state may not prohibit any person from making the ultimate decision to terminate their pregnancy before viability, meaning before the line when a fetus can survive outside of that person's body. That is almost 50-year-old precedent. Decades of Supreme Court precedent underlies this principle. And this ban is a pre-viability abortion ban in the sense that it would completely block someone from obtaining abortion care in Arizona if they had recently received a fetal diagnosis, even if they didn't say openly, I would like to terminate because of this fetal diagnosis that I received. If there's even any inference, the way the law is structured, abortion providers and those other individuals that I mentioned who might assist or treat pregnant people would be at serious risk of very serious criminal liability, civil fines. So it really chills the provision of abortion care to really anyone who's received a fetal diagnosis that would qualify under this law. So that was the first big claim we made. The second is a more unique claim that I wanted to describe because I think it really emphasizes a lot of the biggest issues with this law. And basically, because of the way that this reason ban is structured and these reporting obligations and this kind of accomplice liability that it imposes, it would be almost impossible for a pregnant person to avoid having an abortion provider either directly know about the fetal diagnosis or be able to infer it. And it would also prevent that person from being able to talk openly with an abortion provider, with a physician that's going to be providing them abortion care about their diagnosis. And that's actually a very important component of medical care, to be able to discuss your medical conditions openly and honestly with your medical providers, one of the core tenets of medical ethics. And this law would be chilling the conversations that happen between the pregnant person and their physician. And not just in the context of directly conversing with their abortion provider, but also their abortion provider wouldn't be able to see their medical file from the physician who diagnosed, who made the fetal diagnosis, the genetic counselor who had been talking to the pregnant person about their options, wouldn't be able to refer them to a doctor that can do, would be able to provide an abortion in those contexts. So there's not just a chilling of conversations between the pregnant person and the abortion provider, but also the abortion provider and other medical providers. So there's a principle in constitutional law that says that the state can't make you give up one constitutional right in exchange for being able to exercise another. Meaning the state can't chill your freedom of speech to be able to discuss openly your medical care with your doctor in order to exercise your right to pre-viability abortion. So that was a novel claim that we made, and one that we hope will be successful in this context. All right, and then I'll just describe the second provision, which Sivia mentioned that we challenged. We've been referring to it as the personhood provision. And this component of the law requires every Arizona state law to be interpreted and construed to acknowledge that fertilized eggs, embryos, and fetuses have the same rights as people who have already been born. There are two exceptions to this mandate. The first is medical providers who perform IVF aren't subject to it. And the second is pregnant people who indirectly harm a fertilized egg, embryo, or fetus by, quote, failing to properly care for themselves or by failing to follow any particular program of prenatal care are also exempt from it. The provision's sole function is to create what's an interpretive rule, and that applies across the entire Arizona code, but it's very unclear how that rule works in practice and what it would do. But if it goes into effect, it could be used to expand numerous civil and criminal laws to reach a wide range of actions taken by pregnant people and medical providers to the extent that those actions could harm directly or indirectly a fetus or an embryo or a fertilized egg. And it's not even quite clear how you would harm a fertilized egg, given it's not even possible to detect in a living person whether there is a fertilized egg inside of their body because they're not pregnant yet. So this is not just looking at the actions of people who may be pregnant, it's also the actions of people with reproductive capacity, with the ability to have a fertilized egg inside their body. So you can see that this could be used against like pre-pregnant people as well. And the scope and potential impact of this, it's really hard to describe, first because, as we've alleged, this law is unconstitutionally vague. Under the Due Process Clause of the US Constitution, states are not allowed to pass laws, particularly those with criminal penalties, if it's not clear to ordinary people what actions are prohibited. You need to know that something's illegal in order to be punished for it, basically. And this law is just so vague and it's so unclear on how it operates that it really, the scope of what it could cover is limitless in some ways. And one of the examples that we've pointed out in our litigation is, for instance, physicians often are treating pregnant people for conditions that the pregnant people had before they became pregnant. So an example is someone who's a cancer patient who's undergoing a round of chemotherapy becomes pregnant during the round of chemotherapy. Is the doctor required to stop the chemotherapy because it may harm the pregnancy, even if the pregnant person says, I'd like to continue both my treatment and the pregnancy if I can? What is the doctor supposed to do in that position? Like, where there's not really any clarity as to when the life and health of the pregnant person takes precedence over the fetus or the embryo or the fertilized egg. And then you can envision other types of circumstances where the way that these exceptions are structured, who gets to decide what it means to take care of yourself while you're pregnant? What does it mean to follow any particular prenatal program? Well, what if I follow, like there's fail to follow the program is accepted, but what if you're following a program and that ends up harming the fetus? So what is that criminal? Is that a crime if you decide to do one type of prenatal program over another? It's not clear. And really, as long as like virtually every act or omission of a pregnant person or underlying health condition that they have can have an effect on a developing embryo or fetus. So without any standards or guidelines to prevent this personhood provision from being used to arbitrarily and discriminatorily enforce criminal and civil laws against pregnant people, physicians, and others, there's just no discernible limit, to what actions might be criminalized. And we've seen in other states and in Arizona how laws like this that really assign kind of a personhood right to a fetus or an embryo have been used. And they've been used to try and control the actions of pregnant people, but they've been particularly enforced and used to target Black, Brown, Indigenous people, people with low incomes. Those are the people who really fall into the trap and end up getting criminalized by these laws. And we've seen that they are disproportionately impacted in other states. And that would likely occur in Arizona if this law was allowed to go into effect. So
well, I would say, thank you, Gail. What I was going to say is that I'm really torn whether to go to Alex Gulata, who is the state director for All Voting is Local, or Marisol Garcia, who is the deputy head of the Arizona Election Association, because this was the umbrella that segues to both issues. I mean, there is nothing more fundamental than curtailing constitutional rights than curtailing our right to vote. But Alex, if you'll be patient, I'm going to go to Marisol because of the hypocrisy of protecting the fertilized egg, zygote, embryo, and fetus. And then once a child is born, this state doesn't give a darn about protecting that child. This state has banned mask mandates, and for older students, banned vaccination mandates. So, Marisol, I'm going to ask you to talk about the kinds of, educational and also freedom of speech, because one of the components here is muzzling teachers and putting a gag order on what they teach about race, ethnicity, and sex. So I'm going to ask you to talk about how the Education Association, in conjunction, I know, with the Children's Action Alliance and other groups, is fighting back in court.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of totally based in hypocrisy that we're going to fight for these eventual children, if they're going to be children, but once they're here, we don't want to really take care of them. And, Arizona is known for what we call local control in school districts, where the state doesn't want to get involved in a lot of things, and they want to leave a lot up to local school boards who are elected within the community, and therefore, parents have a choice and are involved in that. But what we saw happen this time was the complete reversal. And in the budget reconciliation bill passed by the legislature, there were, I think, 46 pieces of policy that did not see committee hearings, in which educators, parents, community members could have a say in the process. Two that we decided to go to court to, specifically on the single subject constitutionality of it. One was the ban on mask mandates at school level and school districts. And the second one had to do with what we call prohibition in instruction, prohibited instruction. Both of these are very popular politically for the small minority that want to push back against women's rights. And so what we're seeing is this mass kind of misunderstanding and division being permeated in our communities amongst educators and parents that really was not there a year and a half ago. I mean, a year and a half ago, they were about to have parades for teachers. They were having parades for teachers in their cars, and all of a sudden the reverse happened. And what we are fearful of, if you can all imagine, there are very few professions in which you are potentially in a room with 25 to 30 unvaccinated humans, 8 hours a day, every single day. That is what educators are being faced with, especially under the guise of some sort of disbelief in science that we all commonly know is going to save people. So the mask mandate, the lawsuit that we filed, is asking for their stay and for the entire budget bill to be reevaluated for that one. And the second piece of it, which was mentioned, specifically has to do with prohibited instruction. And I can read the portion that is kind of getting us a little bit worried, but it says we are prohibited from teaching or instruction in the classroom with following concepts: that an individual should feel any discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any form of psychological distress because of their race or ethnicity or sex. I don't know how to stop kids from feeling that. And quite frankly, it's never my intent to have somebody feel shame or guilt. But if I'm a professional, I know how to build community in my classroom. I teach 8th graders social studies, this particular topic. And my intent is to build community where we can talk about it. And also, I have never pointed at a picture of a race, a person, a gender, and said it is their fault that we are in this space. What I do want to be able to do is freely share with my students the true history of our country, especially students who really don't see themselves through the normal historical lens, to know that they have ownership and power and they can make change for the better. So the lawsuit also requests a stay and a repeal of that. It is set to go into place October 1st, so September 29th is the deadline for that. We did have a hearing last week and we were hoping to hear something this week. Because the anxiety in our classrooms is real. It is not only an unsafe working condition, but is now turned into a hostile work condition with parents who are emboldened. We've even had parents become substitutes to then go through teachers' lesson plans and desk to find potential things that they could be harmful for them. Even out of context, I have a bunch of books that might be crossing the line in their view, but I may not use it for my classroom instruction. It may be for my own learning. I have, how to be an anti-racist, which would completely be in conflict with the law. And the school district would be fined. I could lose my credential, and all of that would be done off of a parent. A parent could lodge a complaint. And again, much to Gail's point, none of this was discussed on the floor. We were not able, the Senate didn't let anyone in, and most of their hearings, they didn't even let us speak. They limited it to 1 minute, but on these particular 2 topics, they were not held through committee and they were pushed through on a budget bill. So I think that helps, and I tend to talk fast.
No, that's great to give us a context. It's interesting if everyone isn't aware that Pennsylvania keeps following our lead. So only the other day, Pennsylvania has put a ban on certain books in the classroom, particularly in elementary school, a book like I Am Rosa Parks, which is part of a long series. Everyone who has children or grandchildren are aware. I am Thomas Jefferson. I am, Rosa Parks. I am this, I am that. They put a ban on that. They put a ban on, is it Malala's book? They have, people don't know what to teach, but I'm going to Alex now, and here's my segue. Pennsylvania not only is following with muzzling teachers and censoring classrooms, but they now want to duplicate our fraudit efforts. So I'm going to introduce Alex Gulata, as I said, the state director, I believe, for All Voting is Local. And please tell us what we are going to do to retain the fundamental right we have in a democracy to vote.
All right, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah?
Yes.
Great. So I was trying to figure out how I was going to fit in what I wanted to talk, but what I wanted to talk about tonight, or what I thought would be germane, but it actually fits right in, right? There's anti-democracy, there's divide and conquer. It's all being used to use division to prevent people from moving forward as a society, right? And so, I mean, we're the way I would characterize it is that we are at a turning point in our democracy, right? And democracy's winning, right? So the hopeful thing that I want to say is democracy's winning, but there's really a serious struggle that's happening, and it's not between Republicans and Democrats, in my opinion. It's between a small vocal minority and the rest of us, and it's a well-funded, dark money funded faction of people who believe in authoritarianism over freedom, lies and conspiracy theories over facts and data and science, political power and greed over just basic principles of justice and fairness, right? And that is playing out in all of these contexts, I think, every day, right? And why do I say democracy is winning? If you look at 2020, the 2020 election, we had historic turnout in one of the worst health crises that we faced in a century, right? In a century, the worst health crisis we faced, or very likely. And much of that turnout was increases in communities of color, African Americans, Asian Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, some of the hardest hit communities hit by the pandemic. At one point in time, the Navajo Nation was the most infected place in the world, right? Per capita, the most infected place in the world. Yet Native American voting turnout in Arizona was up 8% in 2020. Asian American turnout was up 17%. African American turnout was up 11%. Latino turnout was up 5%. There were even higher percentages in other states. And so in spite of COVID, democracy prevailed. People came out. People voted in spite of all of the barriers that were put up. And we should celebrate that fact first and foremost, that happened, right? We've moved on because they've tried to undermine it, and people have tried to undermine it from the moment it happened, but it happened, right? And in fact, democracy won in significant ways in 2020 against sort of insurmountable odds. But this faction of people that believe in authoritarianism, lies, abuse of power, they're mounting a huge national campaign. It's financed by dark money interest, and they're trying to silence the voice of voters. And they're doing it in two ways, right? They can no longer win the hearts and minds of people, so they're trying to fix the game. And so one way they're doing it is just plain old-fashioned voter suppression, which is making it harder to vote. Voter registration barriers in Florida, purging the vote by mail list in Arizona and Florida, outlawing drop boxes in Georgia and Florida, restricting early voting Georgia, restricting private grant funding to help election officials, Arizona, Georgia, Florida, basically undermining all the things that help our country achieve historic turnout in 2020, right? So that's the first thing, make it harder to vote. But even more troubling are these attempts to use raw political power to overrule the results, taking over boards of election in Georgia, questioning the results of an election you don't like, right? This sham election review. This time it's happening after the results have been certified. Next time, I can guarantee you it will start before the results are certified, right? This isn't an event. This is a new strategy. This isn't this is just a dress rehearsal for what's going to come in 2022 and what's going to come in 2024. And so we need to get prepared. It's not all bad news. There are good things that can happen and we can put forward. So one is the bad state bills aren't the end of it. Every bill needs to be implemented, and we all need to be part of the process. The League of Women Voters, your group, other groups, all voting is local, community groups like Lucha and others, to make sure that the way that election officials exercise their discretion is in a way that maximizes that voices are heard, that makes sure that people have a fair shake. So there's administrative advocacy at the election official level to make sure that the way these new laws are implemented is as broadly as possible. Second, we can continue to push our Congress people on the Freedom of Vote to Vote Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. There are huge opportunities there still to make real change at the federal level, just one piece of which would have really important ripple consequences in Arizona and a variety of other states. But we need to keep doing that. We can sue. People in Arizona have sued, a number of community groups have sued about both the voter purge bill, the Pebble purge bill, the Pebble destruction bill, and they've also sued over the bill that SB 1003, which basically says that ballots with unsigned signatures can't be cured after Election Day. If I put a messy signature on my ballot and send it in, I have 5 days after the election to cure that. But if I forget to put my signature on the ballot, now under Arizona law, they throw it away. They don't give me a chance to cure it after Election Day. And so a number of our partners have filed suit to basically challenge both of those provisions, both the Pebble Purge provision and the SB 1030 or 1003, basically throwing out the unsigned ballots. The really horrible and insidious thing about SB 1003 is the Navajo Nation had a lawsuit in 2018 or 2019 after the 2018 election that was basically based on the language needs of Navajo voters and the fact that the counties couldn't actually meet their language needs under Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act without giving them a chance to cure unwritten or missing signatures. And so that's how this issue of unwritten or of curing forgotten signatures came up, and the Navajo Nation had settled with the Secretary of State and with several counties to basically make sure that they could cure their votes. And this law was specifically targeted to undermine that settlement, which allowed those Navajo voters any voter who failed to sign their ballot to be able to cure their ballot, but it was specifically targeted to prevent Navajo voters who specifically had this issue and had fought against it and had negotiated for a settlement. And then, so we can sue, and then last, we can basically educate our communities and mobilize them, right? We need to get folks to recognize that voting is basically the last act in a civic engagement process, not that it's the end of a process that starts today. And we need to really educate ourselves, our communities, our business leaders and others to basically say, like, we need to be more active and informed citizens to be able to move these things forward. And I think from my point of view, I'll leave it there in terms of background, and then I can talk a little bit more about some of the referenda and initiatives that people want to get there, but people may have lots of questions. So I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, and this actually, I get to ask the first question, and my question, and this is actually to all three of you. I'm tired. That's not a question. I'm just tired. Signing all of these petitions or suing people or out organizing suppression efforts is exhausting, right? So in addition to fighting back, and it sounds like we've heard some really good ways and a lot of information about how we're fighting back, what can we, and I mean we as NCJW, do to be proactive going forward? And I'll open that to the floor for all three of you. Oh, am I going to have to call on someone?
I'll jump in. I just spoke. I was hoping somebody else, you were probably tired of my voice. So I'll give you a few things. So first of all, there are many ways to get involved, and so I can't get over the we're tired piece, Julie. Okay, it's like we are tired, and guess what? We're going to have to continue to be tired, right? We're going to have to keep fighting, and there's no magic solution. People are out to basically undermine our democracy, and they want to have us, be subjects in a country where we don't have a real voice. And I think that's something worth fighting about. I was an anti-poverty lawyer for 30 years before I got into voting rights, and I just kind of feel like I happened upon the right thing at the right time now, because this is being able to fight for our democracy is really where it's at, right? And so one thing you could do is in the chat, I just put, that's one of the petitions that we're currently running that basically has several like election related provisions that relate to the election procedures manual that we're pushing election officials to consider. So you could go to that bit.ly and sign up. One of the reasons I recommend it is because there are several other things we're going to be doing. So we're pushing a democracy pledge this fall where we're trying to get basic principles of democracy that should be givens in everyone's portfolio and trying to hold all elected officials and candidates for office accountable to them. Why can't you say you're going to actually respect the results of the election? Okay. Under what terms will you respect the results of the election? Julie Gunnigal respected the results of the election, but a lot of people are being trained now not to respect the results of the election. And we need to basically figure out a way ahead of time to hold those people accountable. And then last but not least, there are a bunch of groups that we're part of that run a really robust election protection program once we're actually in voting time. And so in August and again in November, there will be huge opportunities actually for all of July leading up to August and all of October leading up to November. There will be tons of opportunities for people to engage in election protection. And I'll put my email address in the chat. And if people want to know more information about that, or if you sign the petition, which I recommend that you do, then you'll be on our list and we'll reach out to you about election protection. But either way, those are 3 things you could do tonight.
I would like to point out before I let one of our speakers jump in, that NCJW has one of our task forces is to protect and promote the vote. And we would encourage all of you, we also have task force that we are coordinating on reproductive health care. We have one on climate justice. We have one on immigration and education, etc. And so I would encourage everybody to sign up, to engage, to be part of our task forces. You can do it on our digital media, on our social media. Our Facebook site has a jot form. You can do it by emailing our membership VP, Lynn Katzenstein. You can do it by even going online to our website. So we are engaging everybody, and we hope that you will participate, as Alex said. Marisol, I didn't mean to cut in, but I couldn't help getting a plug in here.
Of course. I think for us, the immediacy is we do have 3 referenda that are due on the 29th, Invest in Arizona AZ, which again is going to repeal some of the what we consider bad pieces of legislation that are about to become law regarding taxes that are going to put this state in a very, very difficult spot, has no foresight, is purely just a political move. And so we are carrying 3 petitions and trying to get those on the ballot. And I can put a link in there for folks to know where they can just show up and sign or take one and get 5 signatures, whatever. But I think immediacy and just looking at Alex's background, what I think we could ask folks who, even from the safety of their home, is log on and watch what's happening at your school board meeting. Really see what's happening and what kind of people are showing up, many of which do not live in your community and are making their schools a political battlefield to which it should not be. This is just the beginning. They will take away our working rights, which unions have been upholding for 100 years, or they are going to go after that next, not only just the textbooks, but particularly because education professionals are 85% women in this state. So this is a women's issue for us because if you're going to make our jobs more and more unsafe and very, very much hostile, women who have become able to have the freedom from any sort of needing to provide for their family from someone else, that could be stripped from them, and the kind of slippery slope that could happen. So watch a school board meeting. You can send an email to the school board members, or the most important thing is you can think about running for school board. We need people who are committed to their communities to run for school board. Teachers and educators will get behind you, support you, walk it. Julie knows we'll walk and call and do everything we can to get your name out there. But these school boards are now becoming politicized. The same dark money that Gail talked about and Alex talked about, they are finding people to run that have a political agenda that is not aligned with your organization, in ensuring that women are treated with fairness, as well as our children are treated with fairness.
Gail, now we have, you talk about speaking out. There is, as everybody knows, and we promote it on our Facebook site, there is a march October 2nd, Women's March. But the reality is, and I'm sure everyone will participate, or if not in person, at least empathetically. But marching, permits and porta potties do not change things. We had Women's March back in 2017 and we accomplished nothing. And, I always want to say that we need to build stronger when it comes to reproductive health care access and bodily autonomy. We need to build stronger coalitions. I kept saying to everybody, where were all the students at the University of Texas and every other school in Texas? Why do they not en masse walk out of class? And why was there not a work stoppage a la Gandhi? Why didn't all women and the men who care about them stop work, even if it was 5 minutes? I mean, we have not, for all our petitions, as I said earlier, and our phone calls to legislators. So Gail, what do? We keep plugging up the hole in the dike by filing lawsuits to get injunctive relief across the country. But ultimately, we know that the Supreme Court is going to make a decision, probably May, June, about whether Roe will cease to exist. And if it doesn't, it's going back to every state. It is going to be a state decision, which is why voting in your state and voting for candidates that support the issues you care about is so critical. But I'm going to let Gail, what do you think? How can we mobilize?
Okay. So it is tricky. I think generally, what Alex and Marisol have said applies here too. I know this is a bit of a broken record sounding about pay attention to local races, pay attention to statewide races, pay attention to what your local and state legislators are doing, call them. All the same advice applies. But also I think it's really important to recognize that for a lot of people, a very large amount of the population of people with reproductive capacity, Roe v. Wade has been an empty right for decades. I mean, there are people who have never actually had meaningful access to abortion care or to reproductive health care or any type of health care in this country, in Arizona. And a lot of that, I think, comes back to grassroots organizing. It comes back to reaching out and actually speaking with the communities who are most impacted by this lack of access, and finding groups. I know there's a reproductive justice coalition in Arizona. You can Google them. They have a website, see the different groups that are involved in that and what they're working on. And then I think also looking at abortion funds, as we've seen with what's happening in Texas right now, abortion funds are incredibly important, and they've been doing the work to actually get people access to reproductive health care, to abortion care for decades. I mean, they're of the same type of network that existed before Roe v. Wade. And the pro-choice Arizona runs an abortion fund, and I know that Arizona clinics right now are being impacted by an influx of patients from Texas. So we're already seeing decreased access as a result of another state, and this will only get worse. But there is one additional thing that we can do this week that I think is exciting. It may be because I worked on it and I'm really proud of it, but it's called the Women's Health Protection Act. It was introduced in Congress earlier this year. And it's a big deal because this is the first piece of proactive legislation. This would try to codify the whole Women's Health v. Hellerstedt decision from back in 2016, which basically says that states are not allowed to pass laws that serve no purpose other than to restrict abortion. So the laws that we've challenged this year under SB 1457 would be covered by a federal law and a federal statute, and that's being voted on in the House this week. So
Of course, we need the Senate to pass it, and then somebody
Yeah.
will sue and take it to the Supreme Court. So,
but
you
it
know,
does need to pass the House first.
that's true.
And
That's
that does send a message, right? So sometimes with where we are right now, like, won't sugarcoat it. We're not in the best spot right now. But we also have seen an incredible backlash to what's happened in Texas. And you can see, I mean, I can't speak, a lot about what the justices might do. I can't speculate on that because of where I work. But I can say that public opinion does actually matter, and backlashes do matter. And sending a message does matter in these situations. So the Women's Health Protection Act passing the House would be, I mean, this is actually, a very big move that we've been trying to have happen for a long time now. So that's something to do tomorrow, to get in touch with your representative in the House of Representatives.
Well, and in fact, I would like to note that NCJW has been very aggressively campaigning for WIPA, the Women's Health Protection Act, and across the country and our section as well. We would like to open it up to questions, and I'd like to add that we're supposed to end at 8, but we would like to engage you, and so feel free if you can linger on another 10 minutes or so. We will answer whatever questions. We have one that came in the chat, which is educators have power. Why are they not fighting back? Why aren't teachers walking out? Why aren't they more vocal?
Man, I wish I had a button that was a strike button, and then it would just happen. But I mean, I think if you look down a little bit, Gloria responded a little bit, is that really they have done a really good job. They, the majority party in this state, have done a really good job of keeping us scared, silent, and quite frankly, sick. And that is the reality of what is happening. I mean, we are losing educators. We have, hundreds of children in hospitals because of this. And our primary mode of going to work is to care for your children. And I knew that every day. It was a huge responsibility, that when I had children walk in, it was my responsibility to keep them safe. And so when we organized to get to the Red for Ed movement, it didn't happen overnight. It took a long time. And for me, it was difficult because it was very difficult for us to even say union, labor, that kind of thing. Because honestly, in Arizona, we have a lot of transplants from other states who are trying to leave unionized states. So when you look at the bottom, when it says, there's a sub and that people are politically divided and it creates internal issues, that's 100%. I mean, I have members who do not want to get vaccinated and do not want to wear masks. And so we have to have those hard conversations, and it's real. It's against our values, but we have to think about that. I also want to just say is that, when Red for Ed happened, it was a national phenomenon. And, I was part of the leadership that brought that work to the march, but it wasn't just the march, right? It was the work that we did leading up to it, the organizing, the site reps, the grassroots organizing, and then what happened afterwards, which was us building more power. I imagine what it would be like, much to what was said earlier about Texas, is why were we the only ones out there with a work stoppage? Why weren't there other people saying, we agree, we're gonna strike as well? Right. That's what I would like to see. I would like to see, like you said, why can't we bring coalitions together in which there is a massive work stoppage to call into question our democracy and these intentional underfunding of public interests? Our kids are being completely opportunities taken from them intentionally. This is like rooted in a framework of keeping some of our students to be, to not be able to reach their potential. So I would love to have, parents showing up at school board meetings saying, I support teachers. How can I meet with you? More parents showing up, more businesses. And that's, that the reaction to what you're seeing now is a little bit of what happened from the Women's March, the Students March for Our Lives, and the Red for Ed movement is kind of the boomerang to what we saw happen, is happening now, is that they saw we had power, so they're afraid. So we just need to all come back together, to Alex's point earlier.
Jen Rogers, our VP of Communications, has something to add. Jen?
Thank you, Sylvia, and thanks everybody for joining today. Sylvia and Julie both mentioned earlier NCJW and the Repro Rights Coalition is doing a day of action tomorrow. And I'm just going to press it right now in the chat. We just shared what you can do. We go on social media. You can use the suggested captions in the document and download a graphic that NCJW created today, really helping spread the message tomorrow specifically, help get our voices heard. In addition, if you're on Twitter, Julie and Jody at NCJW will be tweeting live during the hearing. So you can tune into that and share that as well if you have Twitter. So thank you, everybody. And if you have any questions, let me know in the chat.
Yeah, we say that all eyes have been on Texas, but in many ways, this bill is far more dangerous because this penalties in Texas, it's a civil at this point, but there are criminal penalties involved in this bill, and the personhood provision of this bill could be loaded. I mean, taking this one to the Supreme Court could very well have the effect of undermining Roe, because for those of you who may remember when Justice Blackmun in his argument upholding the right to privacy for reproductive health care, termination of pregnancy, he said, until or unless it is proven that the unborn have constitutional rights. So this is what the Arizona legislature is going for here. Do we have any other questions or comments that people would?
Oh, because I always forget this very important thing, the work that the Center for Reproductive Rights does and the work that AEA does and the work that All Voting is Local does is so important. Would you all mind just dropping your, there we go, now the arrows are going the right way, dropping your links in the side too, so that we know how to support you and the amazing work you're doing.
That's great. Thank you. And everyone has the ability to unmute, so please go ahead and ask your questions. Anybody? Lynn Katzenstein, you can unmute. Okay, I see your hand up, but you're muted. So until we figure it out, anyone else? Or Lynn, you can put it in the chat because we're not hearing you.
I got it. I got it.
Okay.
Okay. So this is a question. I think initially you were the one, Savia, to bring up the fact that a lot of these bills are buried in other legislation. And there's no discussion, there's no committee hearings, or you get a 1 minute, response. Does anybody have any idea of how that can be changed in the future? I mean, to me, this is like the filibuster, a procedural maneuver that does nothing but undermine the open discussion and open give and take that democracy depends on. So I'm very curious to know, how do we tackle that? So I'm sorry.
I mean, we honestly, we have to flip the legislature. I mean, unfortunately, we've seen what has happened with a majority party who has been completely intent on doing this. Last session was horrible, and I hate to say this, but this session is going to be worse. They're all running for office. They're all intent on being a flash in the pan and saying outrageous things to get elected and throw out red meat. And so it would not surprise me if they weirdly closed for COVID like they did last year, but they didn't really want to believe in COVID and didn't want masks, but they did not let anyone in the Senate the entire session. So we have to really be committed to the 22 election in flipping both chambers, if not just one, because otherwise we don't even get bills heard, and when or they get shoved into the BRBs, or the budget reconciliation bills, where people were never allowed to speak.
But isn't it true, Marisol, your attorney did argue the provisional problem with introducing these bills as part of budget reconciliation? Is it possible that the judge may rule, if everybody is fortunate, that indeed that cannot stand, that practice cannot stand?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a slippery slope. A few sessions ago, it was 1 or 2 pieces to kind of buy off legislators to get the vote. They are so close now. They need every single Republican to be healthy in a room to take this vote. And so they are twisting arms all over the place. That's why it's kind of gone for 2 to 46 in some of these. And so, yeah, I mean, the judge could say this is against the Constitution, based in the Arizona Constitution, and it could be, who knows what could happen. We could have special sessions happening. We could have all kinds of stuff happen, which would be awesome for us, because then we have, right, we can show up in mass, we can be very, very visual, we can fight back. But we're hanging on. I think a lot of people are hoping this could be part of, to what Lynn's point is, bringing back some sort of organization and civility to democracy through the legislature.
And again, I want to encourage everybody, please sign up to be part of our social action initiatives. You can just do info@ncjw.org and we will respond, because we are out there fighting like all the other organizations are. The reason being that we believe we can serve broader, diverse communities by dealing with policy issues and correcting the root of what is harming the quality of life. So if there are no more questions, Rena Salzman.
Hello, Sylvia. My question's actually for Marisol. I posted it in the chat, but I thought I would just bring it up. And talking about going to like the board meetings, I actually do. I'm in Scottsdale School District and I do watch the board meetings. And I'm going to be honest, they're very intimidating because the people that stand up are very aggressive, and through other means like the PTO, they're like, be careful what you say, because there's a lot of bullying with the children. So my kids go there. So how do you deal with that? Like, I want to stand up, but I also don't want my kids at school to have issues with the parents that feel that they're in the right. And this kind of goes to everything. Like, how do you protect what means a lot to you that are vulnerable, but then stand up for what you know is right and that you should, without hurting people you love?
Yeah, I mean, here I teach history, right? We've been taught this is what happens in history. This is part of it, is ensuring that people are afraid and they don't speak up, and they're going to continue to do this to a point where even now educators are afraid to show up. They don't wear their red, they don't wear their stuff, and we are telling our folks, you cannot secede this part of democracy, is these open school board meetings. And it is worth the risk. And it's the same kind of risk that a lot of those educators took by deciding to go on strike. It's the risk that a lot of our mothers and fathers took to ensure that we have, that I always have had the ability to have abortion care in my life. There were women who take risks, and it seems kind of almost kitschy, but it's the reality. I understand that, our children are put at risk. Thank goodness people organized in Scottsdale and got people elected, like Julie Sinowski, right? Who's a former educator who's working. And so there are ways of sending emails even to the board, where if you're afraid of that, but we cannot be afraid. We have to fight back. And we also have to take the risk, because the reward is so imperative and the reverse is terrifying.
And it's true with elections too, right? I mean, like, election officials are afraid. There are a lot of like moderate Republican legislators that think that everything that's going on with this sham election review is horrible and bad for democracy, but they're afraid to stick their head up above the line. But people have, right? The Maricopa County Board has, come around and really stood up, and Recorder Richer has stood up, and, we need to get more business leaders to stand up. I think part of it is like building a community of people who are going to stand up together. So Rena, you're not standing up alone. It's a whole group of people who are standing
Right.
up together. And we sort of have like that power in numbers. We outnumber this faction of people many-fold. Okay, we outnumber them many-fold. But they're loud, they're obnoxious, they have guns, they brag about it, and they're the kind of people who want to put fear in people because they think that's the way to undermine democracy. And it's scary that we are now at a point in our lives where you think you could just live, but you actually have to have skin in the game because these people are otherwise going to take it away, right? What happened from 2016 to 2020 was like, a dress rehearsal for what's going to happen in the future if we're not all committed to basically putting ourselves on the line for the things that we value and cherish, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And, I would like to say that NCJW's theme here, particularly the theme of last year's gala and the theme of this March 2022 gala, is power and persistence, making our voices heard and being a voice for the voiceless. I mean, we have to stand up. And we have to stand up together. I say this all the time at our meetings, you cannot be on the sidelines anymore. There is no sitting this one out because too much is at stake. And that's why organizations like all the ones represented here are on the front lines trying to affect policy that, again, improves the quality of lives and protects fundamental rights. So with that, I'd like to just go around quickly. If everyone has some, final thought on the panel, including Julie, and have everybody please engage in our social media storm tomorrow and keep an eye out for our hearing, which is at 2:00 virtually, I believe. There will be a link disseminated. And let's hope that the judges come back with the kind of injunctive relief that we are all seeking. So, Gail, final thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, I stay as engaged as you can, participate tomorrow. And I think going forward, kind of to the point of being brave and making your voice heard, is that a lot of what's happened with reproductive rights the past 10, 15 years has a lot to do with how stigmatized abortion is. And we know that 1 in 3 women, rely on abortion care during their lifetimes. So say the word abortion, talk about abortion. If you have an abortion story and you feel comfortable, share it, because we've really seen that really speaking about this and speaking loudly about this right is actually really important. And just alone that action can have a huge impact on those around you. And that impact has a ripple effect. So that's my closing.
Okay, Julie? You're muted. There we go.
Am I unmuted now?
You are.
My mouse disappears, y'all. I was just going to say, we are in the final days of collecting signatures on what might be the 6 most important referenda in the history of the state. If you have not signed yet, please find a signing location. We need to get those all in. I believe it's the 26th is when they want to have them. The 28th is our drop dead date. So literally you've got a week, y'all. And you can hit me up in the chat if you have not yet signed. I am happy to come to you with all 6 and make it worth your while.
Terrific. Please let Julie know. Absolutely. I've signed them. Everyone I know has signed them. We've been out there trying to get signatures. So let's make it happen. Marisol?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Julie, for that. We are 6 days out, so that's a huge thing for organization. But I just want to let you know that, the educators, most of you know an educator or have a student or have grandchildren or nieces and nephews in the school system. It's not going well. And people are struggling. It's a very, very difficult time for us, but I want you to know that we are organizing from every single site all the way up. And when it comes time, I'm hoping you all will join us in some sort of solidarity when we have to take the principled step again and fight back. But I hope that you'll be there with us, but that you'll also be willing to take some risks along with us, because the entire fight is for the kids. That's the bottom line. We do not do it for anything else but the children that are in our classroom. So thanks for the invite. It's been really great.
Thank you for being here. Alex?
Democracy is winning, and we need to keep fighting. And I'll just leave it at that.
Well, that's a great way to end, because indeed, we all have to keep fighting. That's what it's all about. I think that the opposition thinks that we are going to sit back and take it, and we have to show that we are not. So with that, please, everybody here, become involved, take action. Again, sign up to be involved in one of the organizations here, sign up to be involved certainly in NCJW's task forces and help support our mission, and including our development of the state's very first dedicated trauma recovery and treatment center for survivors of sexual assault. So please join us in all of our efforts to improve the quality of life. Thank you and good night.